Sorry for the last minute change. We were supposed to be upstairs, I guess, and then the room changed, and so we're on the big stage. Woohoo! We don't have any videos to present, but if you like, I can randomly insert a couple extra words. All right, okay, good. All right, good. Okay, good. So we're going to talk about the Standards Committee, and then also get into a little bit of detail with the credentials that are supported, and this will be mostly review for a lot of you maybe, but might be everything brand new for some of you as well. So I'm going to try not to assume any advanced knowledge of any of this. And I'm going to speak for probably the first 20 minutes or so, and then I'm going to invite Mark Luba from Joynd Tech, who we heard earlier today, come up and talk about the Joynd Tech Open Badge and Comprehensive Learner Record schemas and standards, and just Joynd Tech in general. But let's have a look at what we're going to do here today, talk a little bit about the committee, get into the credential types, talk about the existing standards, and I'll talk a little bit and explain a little bit about what the Standards Committee itself is all about, of course, and then we'll have Mark come up. And hopefully we'll have a few minutes for Q&A, but it seems like we may be a little tight for time. So buckle up, because this is going to go quick. So in terms of the Standards Committee, it's been operating for, I don't know, more or less the last 3 years or so. There's a few regulars in here. Deb's a regular attendee. And we've had a few others kind of drop in and participate. The purpose of the committee, why it was started 3 years ago, was to ensure that there could be interoperability with the network. So building this velocity network, well, of course, there's all this existing ecosystem out there, and many different standards and schemas, and so it was important to try to figure out, well, how are all these things going to work and plug into, so to speak, plug into the velocity network. And, you know, with a global mindset, you know, sort of trying to think outside of, you know, just any one particular geography. The name of Standards Committee is always kind of funny because it's a bit of a misnomer in that we're not trying to be a standards body, right? That was very clear from the beginning. The Velocity Network does not want to be or become a standards body. And initially what we did was start to take a look around and say, okay, what are the standards that are already out there and what could be leveraged? And we came to a conclusion fairly early on as a committee that there was no one standard or even 2 or 3 standards that could just be adopted and used natively on the platform. And prior to that, there had been a really basic set of schemas that were developed just to kind of get things started, and decision was made by the committee at the time, and committees just made up of members, that we would just build upon those simple schemas that were already defined. And we would use that as the basic set of schemas to interact with the Velocity Network. As I mentioned, it's all about the membership, and the Standards Committee and the schemas can only be developed and move forward if there's participation. And I encourage all organizations to consider sending someone to participate. It's a volunteer basis. You can show up, you can participate as much or as little as you like. We don't assign any work. We ask nicely and beg and plead for people to do things sometimes. But to be honest, right now, you know, the bulk of the work has been done to get us to the point that we're at now, that I'll go into a little bit of detail in a few minutes. And now it's all about really the membership bringing changes and requests forward to the committee to discuss and decide how to move forward. So really there's no proactive movement of or change to the schemas until a member or members come forward and say, hey, this isn't really working for us, or hey, we really need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Can we talk about how that could be incorporated in the standard? And I'll touch on a few simple examples later on here as well. We meet on the last Monday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's always difficult to try to find time zone that works for the West Coast here in the US, and then also for Europe. So 11 a.m. Eastern tends to work, and unfortunately it's not a great time for anyone in Asia Pacific. Occasionally we get folks that are joining from that region also. So diving into the actual credential types, so I want to kind of build the story up from the ground up. First of all, the schemas that are in place, the credential types as we call them, that we're going to look at in a minute here, they were not created from scratch. So they're built on standards and schemas that are already out there. Kind of, frankly, cherry-picked some of the schemas that are available from schema.org that we'll look at. Underlying everything is W3C verifiable credential standard that I'm not going to go into here because that's a whole other presentation. Obviously, we're using JSON link data to be able to have references to other standards and organizations. We're going to talk about the One EdTech Open Badge and CLR. And we're also, we have a relationship with the Credential engine in that we can also reference, using the alignment property, we can reference credentials that are maintained in that database as well. So this is just showing an example of a schema.org property called address country, and just showing that this is something that we've incorporated in. So a lot of the underlying building blocks are based on schema.org. Again, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Even though we came to the conclusion that there was no one standard that we could use, we decided to kind of borrow from a number of different standards. The next layer up are subtypes, and these are things that are not issued directly to the Velocity network. These are things that are basically incorporated into some of the credentials that are issued and that have commonality across usually multiple credentials. So we have address, for example, which is typically a physical address or a mailing address. We have the alignment property, which allows us to link to other things, to make references to other things on the internet. We've got the organization subtype, which could be any type of organization. It could be an employer or a company, not for profit, could be an educational institution. This example showing organization example is the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. This one's, as far as I know, completely fictitious for now. As an example, I mean, they're not an actual organization that's issuing or that's being referenced. Then there's person, which is somewhat self-explanatory, hopefully. Then we've got place, which is similar to address, but it's a little bit more general. So place typically is used in an employment type scenario where you may have like a McDonald's location. So it doesn't need to have the precision of an actual street address. It's just indicating, where it may be or how that organization may reference their different locations. And scores and validity tend to apply specifically to assessment, which I'll talk about in a minute here. So now we get to the good stuff, which are the actual credentials or credential types that can be issued on the Velocity network. So the first one that we have is identity. That's obviously one of the foundational credentials, and that can include anything from a passport or a national ID, those sorts of identity type credentials. We have employment credentials, which it can be either a past employment or a current employment. There's an education degree, which is the example that I've called out here in the slide, which is, as it implies, it doesn't necessarily have to be from a university or a college, but it's indicating some sort of a package of things for which a degree credential was issued. And again, there's kind of subversions of that. There's a graduated degree, there's current degree, and then there's a registered degree. Then more specifically, we have courses, which can be just a finer description of what the person was actually undertaking in their course. And we have certifications and licenses. So certifications, all of these things in the top block here are things that I think of as being traditionally part of a resume or CV. Those are kind of all the things that you would typically expect to see. The things that you don't expect to see normally on a CV are, but that are also credentials, kind of primary credentials that can be issued on the Velocity network are assessments and open badges, which Mark will get into in a little bit. So assessment was an important one to be at this level, definitely because of a few of the founding members who are assessment vendors or have assessment platforms. And so each of these credential types has a schema behind it that has been created and discussed and debated and formalized and approved by the standards committee, eventually issued and published in the documentation. This one here, as I mentioned before, example of an education degree. And here we're just showing, this is, if you're familiar with JSON, it probably looks pretty straightforward. If you're not familiar with JSON, it may look a little alien, but the whole point of JSON is it is meant to be human readable as well. So if you read through it, then you can sort of make sense of it, even if you're not familiar with JSON. So as you would expect, it's showing you the university in this case where the person attended, and then the program name and the degree, et cetera. So these are credentials, all of these ones in the list here, we think of and call layer 1 credentials. I'll explain layer 1 and layer 2 in a second. And the main thing to keep in mind about these credentials for now is that the latest version is version 1.1. And in terms of finding the documentation, where you can see all of the detail behind these, it's quite straightforward. You can go to the Velocity main website and look for developers and click through on building blocks. It's usually the one I got to think a little bit about before I realize that's the one. So go to building blocks. It's usually process elimination. That's the one to go to. And then you'll see credential types. And then you can drill down into as much detail as you like. Everything is up there. All of the technical documentation is up there if you'd like to learn more about that. All right, a couple of quick schema updates for those of you who are already familiar with the schemas or may not have been that involved with the committee over the past few months. We have made a few minor changes, or relatively minor changes, I would say, but important changes. So the first one, and this is a great example of a change that was brought forward by some of the background screening members a while ago. There was a concern that credentials could be issued, and if they didn't actually have the name of the recipient kind of baked into the credential, then there could be some confusion, especially for their use case for when they're going through the process to validate credentials. They wanted to have the recipient's first name and last name as a minimum as part of that. So in the version 1.1, which is again kind of the latest version and the recommended version, we now have this recipient in all of the, I think almost all, if not all of the credential types. So you'll see here, pretty simple, but it's now a required field for given name and family name. If you're issuing or if you're reading the V1.1 schema. Badge version 1.1, I don't know why it was a 1.1, but it was a 1.1. That was the original badge definition, schema definition from the Velocity Network Foundation. And it's going to be deprecated because it's going to be effectively superseded now by the Open Badge schema, the version 2 and also the version 3. The other change, relatively recent change, is this new property called image, which allows, again, for those that aren't familiar with the schemas, and it's probably not that exciting or interesting, but it just allows a logo to be included in the credential that would indicate the actual organization that it relates to. So in the case of a notary issuer, the default behavior of the network is that it would be showing the logo of the notary issuer. So this allows to have now another logo, which is actually probably the one that needs to get displayed, or that you would want to display to an individual. The caveat to that is that it's the responsibility of the wallet application to take advantage of that property. So those are the changes, few changes. To be honest, I mean, there was a lot of work that was done, probably, I don't know, like between a year and two ago to really get things to a level that everyone was comfortable with and that we could proceed with. And so everything that you've seen presented over the last day has been based on that work, and based on that standard, either the V1.1 or the V1.0 set of schemas.
And Rick, I do think it's really important to emphasize, probably said this, I came a little late, sorry, but that we did a lot of work, just as you were saying, Rick and the team did a lot of work, I can't take any credit, setting up the initial schemas, and then we sort of froze, and there have been a few requests recently, but really the Standards Committee has been pretty quiet for the last year. And I want to really encourage you all to think very openly about, what you need. If it can be supported by what we have, great. Nora and I have had this conversation a lot. I'm sure he's going to keep us busy now with credentials that are compliant to what the requirements are of the healthcare industry. But don't think about this. Maybe in Korea, there's a completely different needs, and we're not aware of that, right? This is not a static thing. Our aim is to be able to support whatever use cases you need in a consistent and compliant and interoperable way. And so that the Standards Committee is a very important body for you to take advantage of, be active in. If what we're doing is not supportive of your needs, then come change it. It's for you. It's not for itself. Okay?
So anything, based on what Jeff shared earlier, that whole idea of the migration to the skills-based economy, so away from roles into a skills-based economy, is there a schema that's been set up or that we're looking to adopt to define skills in a taxonomy that's going to be consistent?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So we don't have a request for a skill credential. Basically what an assessment credential includes in it, because most assessments assess some kind of skills, and if they're published correctly if they're doing a good job being published, they're also mapped on Credential Engine or to skill taxonomy. Courses, we have a course schema that should be, if that's published correctly and referenced correctly to skill taxonomy, so we can support that through some of the existing. We don't have a pure skill credential schema yet, but again, someone come up with a
Open Badge 3
does support
has a skills achievement.
So, yeah, and that's where there's good overlap as well. Yeah, and just to add what Eitan just said, the flip side to that is that the Standards Committee is not in the business of just creating new stuff. Like we're not just creating things for the sake of creating them. So it really has to be, I did mention it before, but just to reemphasize that point, it's the members that need to bring things forward to the Standards Committee, and presumably if there's a need that you have, you're going to bring it forward, you're going to kind of sponsor it, you're going to push it forward and participate in that, not just throw it over the wall of the Standards Committee, because you'll have a vested interest, of course, to make sure it turns out the way that is most useful for your organization. Okay, so in terms of leveraging existing standards, this was like it was probably just over a year ago. I want to give credit to Andres for coming up with this. I think it was maybe his idea or maybe his team's idea, but it seems pretty simple on the surface, the idea of a Layer 1 and Layer 2 credential. So it's Layer 1 and Layer 2. Well, we just finished talking about the Layer 1 stuff, okay? So the Layer 1, we call that the interoperability layer, and it is required. Certainly if you want to earn the credits for issuing credentials, and just in order for everything to work kind of normally or as designed. I didn't mention this when I was going through the examples of the credential types, but there's very minimal information that's required in those credential types, and it's pretty exceptional when we decided to add in the recipient name as a required object with those two required fields at least. In the vast majority of cases, most of the fields are not even required. So it's a pretty light effort to create a Layer 1 credential. Now, obviously, the more that's in a Layer 1, then the more valuable it may be and the more useful it may be to a relying party. But technically, it can be very thin. It can be very, very light. Where the kind of the breakthrough was when we were trying to figure out, well, how do we, on the one hand, allow some use of other standards, but not tie ourselves to any one or two or three standards that are out there. So that's how we count this Layer 1 and Layer 2. And so Layer 2 is really, as the fancy icon there indicates, it's kind of like you can put anything you want in the Layer 2, which seems a little bit ridiculous, but it's true. You can put, the extreme example would be a PDF file or an image file or something like that. And the idea is that Layer 2 is not necessarily going to be useful for all relying parties. Because, for example, if you packed in a, you know, like an HR open resume into the layer 2, well, the relying party who's, you know, requesting making the disclosure request to the individual, they may not be able to do anything with that data because they have no concept of it. Maybe it's a, you know, maybe it's an ed tech system or something, or you know, an SIS, and they have no concept of resume. But that's okay, right? I mean, it's just in there. It's almost like a bonus, or it's an opportunity for different subsets of ecosystems out there to have better collaboration, because if you can take advantage of that, great, it's there for you, right? But at a minimum, it's important to have the layer 1, again, certainly in terms of being compensated. And so hopefully this graphic will make it a little bit more clear. So the layer 1, the idea of the layer 1 is you've got all those different individual credentials that get issued, right? So here's, you know, 1 degree, and here's 1 assessment set of scores, and here's 1 employment, previous employment. And the idea of the layer 2 is that now you can add in, you know, a richer set of data, whether it's the CLR from one ed tech, or it's an HR open standard for resume or something else. And the idea is then to map those and create your layer 1, your individual layer 1 credentials based on whatever you're providing in that layer 2. So again, at a bare minimum, you know, any relying party that's plugged into the Velocity network is going to be able to take advantage of the layer 1 credentials that you're sharing. And if you're the issuer, then of course you're getting compensated for those. But as a bonus, there's an opportunity for a much richer set of data in layer 2. And so it was mentioned on the previous slide, but I'll say again, it was the layer 2 we refer to as the innovation layer, because it really opens things up. And you can imagine all kinds of different things that you could do with layer 2. And sure, like for 99% of the world, or 99.999% of the world, maybe it's meaningless. But for that 0.01% that you interact with very closely, or that, you know, micro ecosystem that you work within, maybe it is quite important, right? Like we talked about earlier today, a PDF version of a transcript, and I think you pointed that out a ton at the time as well. Yeah, you could put the PDF, if that's the stumbling block of adoption, well, great, just put that PDF image in the layer 2, and I think you made the point also, like, you know, most HR technology systems aren't going to be able to do anything with it, but that's okay, they don't need to, right? If they can, you know, it's whoever it's important for and whoever needs that data, then they'll be able to pull that out and access that. Sure. Yep. And so license to practice. So that, you know, I don't think I have licenses on the bottom there, but you could imagine also having, you know, the full-blown license, and it's a PDF or whatever it is, whatever form it takes in layer 2, but you're going to still create, as an issuer, you would still want to create that layer 1 that has the basic information. And like I'm talking about 4 or 5 fields. Okay. All right.
I'll just say, Noor and I have talked about this a lot. It's very clear for us, for instance, that in the basic license that we have is not strong enough to support the requirements of U.S. healthcare or global healthcare. And so we're going to be working with NCSPN and hopefully other health licensing bodies in healthcare to ensure that we have a layer 2 that will be of more value and compliance within the healthcare ecosystem. It's not something that is required if you get a license in some other areas. If you're a forklift driver license, you don't need everything that is required in healthcare, but you absolutely do in healthcare. And so healthcare providers will know how to consume that layer 2, but it's not the only license kind of license.
Because the other aspect is that from the freedom of what kind of credentials to give in healthcare, you have no freedom. The hospital or the licensing body need to know your full history, because if you have any malpractice history, it needs to show.
We're learning that. That's exactly why you need to be with Noor, part of the standards committee, to provide us with the insight of what is required so this can be compliant.
Eitan, do we have a few minutes to have Mark run through his?
Mark, you're here. Please take. Are you sure? It's my time, so I can just.
Okay, I'll be quick. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. You have a clicker? Here we go. And this won't be a technical overview. It's really just to talk about the organization a little bit and our vision for digital credentials historically and going forward. One Ed Tech has been around for 25 plus years. We're now 900 or so organizations strong. About half of those organizations are education institutions, so K through 12, colleges, universities, et cetera. And the other half are the tech companies that support those institutions. So it's a really great blend because we bring together the tech and the business users, much like is being done here at Velocity Network. We have 3 relevant standards that are in this particular space. We have more standards that we support. Our focus is on the teaching and learning ecosystem. So if it has to do with teaching and learning, we have some type of interoperability play related to that. The digital credentials being kind of the terminal point for teaching and learning, right? It's a point of recognition. Open Badges was brought to us in 2016 by the Mozilla Foundation based on their observance of our work on digital credentials for transcripts. So they saw how serious we took it and agreed to have us actually take over the work, which we were happy to do. It was a little bit confusing early on because you have 2 forms of digital credentials. Open Badge being representation of a single achievement, if you will, and the Comprehensive Learner Record, which started as this electronic transcript, is a collection of those achievements. Now, the thing about that collection is that the individual components can actually be related together. So you can do things like create what's called a stackable micro-credential, related steps to get to some greater thing. So there are some capabilities inside of that CLR package that you can't do with an independent Open Badge. And I'll show you this in a minute, the contents of the achievement itself are identical. So you can create a very, very rich structure in an Open Badge, even though historically it was fairly sparse. This latest version of Open Badges supports much more metadata because we brought things over from the Comprehensive Learner Record when we decided to upgrade both of these to be verifiable credentials. So now the latest versions are, in fact, VCs. And then there's this standard called CASE, which is used to publish skill frameworks in a machine-readable form, and so that those skills can be persistent on the web or privately, but imagine them being persistent on the web, where each skill is independently and uniquely identifiable. So when those skills are referenced inside of those credentials, there's that connection back to the framework that they started in. And that framework can actually be connected to other frameworks, and which can form equivalencies and articulation agreements across schools, and there's relationships between educators and employers can be developed using this association graph, effectively, that CASE supports. So the work was designed to last for an individual's lifetime. Imagine you have a learner at the very first opportunity in primary school, and maybe she's having difficulty in a particular subject area, and she's transferring from school district to school district. But having a record of that compared to the academic standards that the state is requiring, it gives really strong insights to the school district that learner is now operating in. So there's things that you can do with excuse me. That's the one word that I can't remember today. So the primary school, then through higher education, possibly into the military and into her career, and throughout her career, this record structure should survive inside of a digital wallet, naturally. And that's why we're such a strong supporter of the digital wallet concepts, and very thrilled by the progress that you all are making. If you type in One Ed Tech Wellspring, you'll find all sorts of information, research that we've developed, as well as information about representations, like demonstration systems that perform some of the functions I'm going to share with you briefly today. So please do go to our website and read all the background.
As you know, institutions are moving very consistently and dramatically to a skills-based program. We are associating with institutions, and they desperately want to align their curriculum to meet the needs of industry. That's just a fact. And the number of credentials is going through the roof, increasing year over year. This is work that we did with the Credential engine. Of course, it's happening internationally. It's happening at the state level. It's happening in private and public universities as well as in the corporate world. So digital credentials, micro-credentials in particular, represented by the open badges, are really on fire. So these standards form the basis of this longitudinal record. That the number of use cases, and this was pointed out yesterday, it may have been by Manoj, the number of use cases is almost incalculable. We're focused right now on this area here, from education to work, but moving all the way back to some of the examples I raised earlier, or college admissions and those types of problems. Extremely valuable to have this type of regular and stable learning records. So our presumption is that this high-quality structured data is going to support and does support skills-based hiring and better hiring. Employers will be able to perform in their applicant tracking system. And you can see some examples of the types of information that can be carried in either an open badge or a comprehensive learner record. It is really, really substantial, including evidence of learning, actually, work products that the individual created. And our idea is that this data is going to be highly useful, of course, for HR and talent systems. I'm preaching to the choir, but will actually result in better hiring through their HR funnels. So I mentioned that we've developed demonstration software, which we've now made available to our members. And that software incorporates issuing platforms, what we call an achievement portal on the left-hand side, as well as talent search technology on the right-hand side, and a digital wallet in the center. We're actually on our second revision of this model, which supports both a push of credentials, so you can submit your credentials for consideration, but it also supports the pull, which is the concept that Alex was talking about earlier this morning, where a query can be initiated on a recruiting platform for someone that has certain types of skills, and actually go around the network and with that query and get a response back if that learner has toggled the opt-in option on their portal in their wallet. So this is a model we've been experimenting with. This kind of predates our involvement here with the Velocity Network. From our point of view, the network kind of implements this, and we're really happy about it. We are, yep.
I really need a few minutes.
Yep, okay. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. And I do want to say that there's a few months ago we had a conversation with someone. They said, we were presenting Velocity and said, so you're competing with One Ed Tech. And I said, absolutely, you completely didn't understand my presentation if that's what you think. We actually, we're not a standards body, despite the work that Rick has been doing in the standards committee. We're absolutely not a standards organization. We have no intent of being one. And we're really excited and proud to be collaborating with One Ed Tech. And I think in the next few months, hopefully you'll be seeing a deeper collaboration. It's working, and us leveraging more of the existing work that One Ed Tech has been doing, and hopefully their network, they'll be leveraging ours, and everyone will gain from it.